everyone, and welcome to Prophetic Art Mastery, Week 5, Session 2, and today, something new. Today is going to be spent looking at paintings. I'm so excited. There are 3 things you need to be aware of and consider when it comes to creating beautiful paintings and developing your style. And those 3 things are paint quality, paint technique, and most important of all, edges. So again, number 1, paint quality, 2, paint technique, and most important of all, edges. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on edges today so as to make you an edge master. Because other than understanding values, I believe one of the most important things you can grasp that will take you out of the beginner's category as an artist into the amazing category. And truly, most fine art graduates never learn this, is edges. Now, granted, you cannot learn this stuff by tomorrow, you guys. It won't happen by one fell swoop. However, it is very learnable by anyone, every single one of you. And I believe you will see that by the end of today's video. So let's begin with paint quality and technique. And this is primarily the way in which the artist puts paint on their canvas, board, or paper. So let's begin. Paint quality refers primarily to the application of thick or thin paint. Watercolors, obviously, lend themselves mostly to thin and transparent paintings, while oils and thick-bodied acrylics are best if you want an impasto look. An impasto actually means that the paint stands out from the surface. But then too, you guys, you want to apply the rule of a dominion. A painting that is all thin and very transparent looking, or all thick impasto paint, is not nearly as interesting to the eye as having both, with one or the other dominating. Now you can create the feeling of thickness and texture by being very familiar with values and temperature and using both of those elements to create that sense of depth and dimension that you can't get with watercolors otherwise. Now this image is a close-up of one of my own finger paintings. It's done with tempera paint, and actually the surface is absolutely smooth. But looking at this image, you would think it's very, very textural. And I created that sense of texture by using warms and cools, because cools, remember, go way in the background, warms are in the foreground. So by having those cool greens and layering warm greens over the top, it looks like this image has a lot of texture and depth that if you were to touch the canvas, you'd be surprised how completely smooth it is. So paint quality has to do with how thick or thin the paint is being applied. Paint technique has to do with how the artist puts paint on the canvas. In this case, we're talking about brushwork. Does the artist make powerful, bold strokes or timid little careful strokes? We're going to come back to this painting shortly, but for now, I just want you to notice the bold brush strokes in the background compared to the more careful brush strokes of his face. And then I want you to notice the timid brush strokes of the trees in this image. And while we're at it, although the color in this painting is quite beautiful, I want you to notice how the water, which is supposed to be reflecting the sky, is not reflecting any sky color at all. While watercolors can obviously only be thin, they can appear full of texture and dimension based on the boldness of the brush strokes and also the colors and values, as in this beautiful painting by Charles Reed. Now we get to talk about this super important factor in creating a sense of texture, but also a sense of style. A person's style will show up in the way they do edges. It's all about edges. Edges is something most beginners and amateurs never even think about. Yet being aware of edges and applying the proper edge work is one of the fastest ways to make a beginner look amazing, like right off the bat. So let's talk about edges. What are edges? Edges is what you do between shapes and the different colors and the different values. When your canvas is a flat surface, edges go a long way in helping you create depth and shape. There are basically four types of edges: hard edges, medium edges, soft edges, and finally lost edges. One becomes an edge master by varying them. Now you can learn to see the different types of edges in one fell swoop, like we all like to learn. However, learning how to apply them and where to apply them and when to apply them is a whole nother thing. Let's begin with the hard edges. This is where the edge of one color and value comes up to and directly stops at the edge of another. A habit that seems very hardwired in the human psyche. So is putting everything dead center, as you can see in this painting. It doesn't take long for kids to start creating hard edges all the time. And as adults, it really becomes hard to free ourselves from it. So the sooner you learn edges, the better. I also want you guys to notice the compositional issues with this painting. A dead center moon, symmetry on both sides, the water coming down right the middle of the painting. But you guys don't make these kind of mistakes anymore. Hard edges are the most common edges and actually the least desirable. Although hard edges are also known as a style. Many of you may have heard of Grandma Moses, who started painting at age 78, by the way. And you can see in her paintings where every edge is hard, but this became her style. Of course, you might notice she does have some soft edges in the far distant hills and that rainbow behind the main tree there. Having all hard edges are the secret to the primitive style of painting, and many people have adopted this style. Notice how even the cloud edges in this painting are hard. Paul Gauguin used a lot of hard edges, and hard edges is actually a very popular style for a lot of different artists and galleries. Acrylics are the best for this style of painting as the colors will dry fast and you don't have to worry about the lack of blendability. This is a primitive or hard edge dominant painting, but it still has soft edges in the way that it blended the water and even in the sand and sky. Here's one of my own paintings. This was a finger painting that I did in New Zealand several years ago. And for me, it has a little too many hard edges. Like water should be softer because it's moving, and the edges should get softer and softer as you go further and further in the background to create depth. However, when you're doing a painting in about 35-40 minutes that's that big, you do what you can. Here's one of my oil paintings that I did, and I have quite a variety of edges in this one. You can see there's hard edges with the white logs and the tall vertical trees that are very light colored, but then the medium colored vertical tree trunks, just because their value is so much lower, creates a sense of medium and soft edges. And if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see I even have some lost edges where the light yellow aspen leaves just get lost in the light of the sun up there. Here's a painting done by my friend Kevin McPherson in Europe. And I'm sharing this one because I want you to notice that the hardest edges are in the foreground. And then as you move back to the middle of the city, we have medium edges. As you look in the distance to the far part of the city, we have soft edges, so that by the time you hit the horizon way back there, that's almost a completely lost edge, as well as the clouds in the sky having lost edges. So you can see that edges is one of the secrets to creating depth. Having a variety of edges is really what makes a painting interesting. You can see in this one we have the hard edges of the fruit on the left, and then we go up into the flowers and we see the softer edges, the medium edges, and it causes our eye to move all around the painting and we don't get stuck anywhere. Now in this Richard Schmid painting, you can see again a wide variety of edges. And the strongest edges are right there on the left foreground, you know, that 1/3 line where he has that white tree, which is obviously the center of interest to him. Because as you go away from that tree, edges become softer, and in the background, they're almost completely lost. Now, don't be fooled into thinking that's how his eye actually saw this painting. When he was standing there, he saw all that stuff you see on the right hand of the painting as strongly with all its edges as the left side. And I'm sure he saw those trees in the distance as well. So you can tell he made a lot of personal choices about edges that had nothing to do with what was actually in his sight. That had everything to do with his intention about what he wanted to portray in this painting. Now here's another Richard Schmid that you've all seen before and our friend Christine copied. He did pretty much the same thing in this one where almost all the edges in the painting are lost except for those two trees. And then I want you to notice the house in the background. All of us assume and see the house right away, but if you study it really close, it's just one hard edge for a roof and a couple dark shapes. And we all believe that's a house, and it has very, very little detail at all. Now this is one of my own seascapes, and I'm actually putting it on here to show you what not to do because so much of the water in this one is hard edges. This was an earlier painting, and because all the edges are hard, it looks more static. There really isn't a sense of flow and movement like water would have. So even if you like it, there's just not that sense of movement that I would want to portray. And here's another seascape I did. I probably did this about 5 years ago. I actually did it in the Kailua Kona gallery that I'm in. And it was really fun because people got to watch me paint it and I sold it on site. It was great. However, the point I want to make to you is how much softer the edges are in this one. And so that portrays both distance and movement. The foreground tree is hard edged and that lets you know how much in the foreground it is compared to the water. And also notice how soft the sky is. The reason I want you to notice how soft the edges are is most beginning and even amateur and even some pro artists will make all their clouds edges really hard and lose that sense of atmosphere. And this is why intention or intent is so important because those clouds probably did look a lot harder edged than you actually see them there, but I wanted to create the Hawaiian atmosphere. Now this painting I did on the Oregon coast. It's Cape Perpetua, and I actually did a small plein air on site. Those lilies weren't actually in that exact position. They were behind me, but I wanted to put them in the paintings. So with my artist license, I showed the world I had an artist license, and I moved those lilies so I could get them into my painting. But the other thing I want you to notice again is how hard edged those lilies are in the foreground. And then if you look at the first bank, it's a harder, darker edge. And as you move back, the edges got softer and the values got lighter and less intense as well. And then in the furthest cliff, um, softest edges of all, very light, very blue to create that sense of atmosphere. Now, the other part of edges that you need to understand is not just that you soften the edges, but you can create a sense of a soft edge by having the values very close together. So, for instance, in that middle bank, I really didn't soften any edges so much as all the values were so close together, regardless of the color, that the edges actually look softer. So edges is not just about what you do with them with your brush, but what you do with your values as well. So a strong contrast in values also creates a harder edge. Okay, I'm going to show you one more of my seascapes, and I'm a little partial to this one because this is the first painting that ever got into a national show, and it also won an award. And it's one of my favorite places on the Oregon coast. This scene is only about a mile and a half from the studio that I had and I taught out of. There used to be a ton of otters that would live on those dark rocks down there in the water in the foreground. It was just one of my favorite places. But I also want to show it to you because, again, I want to demonstrate to you how to create depth in the foreground. I have the darker values, I have the harder edges, and the hardest edges of all are the contrasting values of the cliffs right below the house in the mid area. And that's really where I wanted your eye to go anyway, because I just loved the contrast of the dark shadow in the foreground against the bright sunshine in the middle ground. And then, of course, everything fades back into the background, both in value and edges. There's so much more I'd like to share with you about this painting. Like, for instance, notice that the dark trees against the light background. It's really important when you're trying to get a person's or a viewer's eye to move through the painting that one of the ways you do that is by contrast. So darks against lights and lights against darks. And we could go further on that one, but that would take too much time. But the other thing I want to tell you that happened that I discovered right after I finished this painting was they were having a wedding at that very house you see in the painting. And I never knew that. I could hear noise over there, but not over the rest of the sounds of the ocean and atmosphere. And there was a wedding happening the very day that I painted this painting. And when I found that out, it really blessed me. Something prophetic about that. So the rule about having a variety of edges doesn't just apply to landscapes. So I decided to show you this flower. Again, there's a lot of hard edges, but in the background, the totally lost edges, but also within the flower petals themselves where the outside edges might be quite hard. As you look closer into the middle values or the middle of the flower, you see medium edges and soft edges, all which creates that sense of form. So edges are really important in creating form as well. And speaking of form and how edges create form, this was a finger painting I did in church at a Sean Bowles conference. Actually, he is now the proud owner of this painting. He has it for his daughter. But the point I want to make with this one is, again, how the edges create a sense of form. So the outside edges of the hand, even though it's disproportionate, are hard, but the form from going from the underside of the hand to the top of the hand where the light is hitting, is blended out to almost no edges at all, in spite of the fact I'm going from a very dark purple to a light red. And that has created that sense of roundness to the hand. So edgemanship is really important for creating form. Okay, on to other people's paintings. Now, I brought this one up because I wanted to show how edges also describe the texture of your subject matter. So in this case, the brushwork in the back is very soft. It keeps things in the background, and you know by the brushwork it's trees. But now when it comes to the statue of the lion, now the edges are very hard, which delineates what the subject matter is made of. And then when you go to the soft edges of that little squirrel tail, then you get a sense of fur. So again, edges are important in regarding creating the feel and texture of your subject matter as well. Now, this beautiful painting demonstrates another type of edgemanship of which I am no master at all, and I would love to be one day. And that is where one color comes over another color wet into wet. And it's really picking up the softer transition that many painters want or intend to capture. They call it overshooting or cutting in. Is another term where this gives the artist an opportunity to create both hard and soft edges using that valuable thing we just learned called negative space. So it's pulling what's in the positive space out into the negative space and the negative into the positive, and it just creates this really beautiful transition and integration with the background that I would just love, love, love to have some time to practice, practice, practice. Now here's a painting by Kevin McPherson, and as you all now know, I traveled with him in Europe, and this is one of the actual paintings I watched him paint. I sat my stuff up about 3 feet behind him, and I was working to do actually the exact same painting. And another woman who was on that trip with me and who became a very, very good friend, she began to do the same thing. And this was actually her painting that she did. She was about 3 feet in front of him, so she couldn't see what he was doing. So I was quite impressed with her work. And I'm delighted to say that I am the proud owner of this painting, and especially so as she ended up passing from cancer, which is such a shame because she was a very talented and a very special lady. Now we're looking at Kevin's painting again, and although hers was very pretty with color and soft edges, you can see that he has much stronger shapes and values, which read much more clearer. Very strong. Here's a shape that's this color, here's a shape that's that color and value. And it really demonstrates the power of shape and color. Now, a side note here, those Dutch mills were actually chocolate mills, but they were closed that day to the public, which is such a shame because they were also still making chocolate, and chocolate wafted through the air while we were painting, and it was the most delicious torture that you can ever imagine because it smelled like heaven and yet we couldn't touch it. What a fabulous memory. Now I want to demonstrate to you the way Kevin sees when he's painting. So this is a pond very, very close to his house. And you can see he begins the painting with big shapes of color and big shapes of value. So he's establishing all the shapes and all the colors and values as big masses right off the bat. After that, he begins refining the shapes and the values, putting in just a few smidgen of details, although most people think there are more details than are actually happening. And then finally, at the very end, he puts in the little flicks and flecks of detail that really make things pop and creates this beautiful painting. Now, this painting is from almost the exact same viewpoint, but later in the year. And I'm humbled to say that actually I painted this one. I had the wonderful opportunity to get to paint his pond near his place up in the mountains outside of Taos. I feel like a very, very blessed woman. Now, one last key to be able to know when to make edges soft, edges hard, how to see shapes, how to see value, how to see color, how to see it all when you're on site. Here's the secret key: squinting. Squint, squint, squint. I used to have a shirt on when I would go paint outside with my students, and on the back of the shirt it would say, "Yes, I am squinting." So, squinting is key. Well, that just about does it into the world of edges, and you can see how the way you handle edges will play a part in the style you will eventually develop. Please leave comments and let me know what you thought of this process of touring paintings with me through video. I will put your playwork into a PDF, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the coaching call, and let me know what you thought. Okay, see you soon. Bye bye.